But to those who believe the spirit of the struggle for peace, justice, and freedom has been broken through nearly 3 years of warfare, I have news for you. That spirit is not broken. I bore witness in Sudan to the trauma of the unspeakable brutality that people have suffered, but also to the resilience and defiance of the served. I met with young people who are the critical first responders to the needs of their communities, organizing and delivering aid, often in the face of massive bureaucratic obstacles, risking detention and violence. Their clarity of purpose came through. As one civil society leader told me, and I quote, "We don't have the power to stop the war, but we will do what we can to keep civilians alive." Another young volunteer said, "The price of war is being paid by young people." Sudanese young people are at the front lines of this war, serving those who are in need of humanitarian aid. I met with women, legal aid and humanitarian organizations, some of whom provide free legal assistance to women victims of violations and abuses that are linked to the war, again, often at great risk to themselves. I met with an engineer in the Nairobi dam and hydroelectric power station, which once provided 70% of the electricity needs across Sudan. It has been hit multiple times by drones launched by the Rapid Support Forces, most recently just 3 weeks ago. These censored attacks disrupted essential power to hospitals, interrupted irrigation for crops, affecting livelihoods of people, disrupted access to clean water, facilitating, as a result, the spread of the disease. Attacks on critical civilian infrastructure are serious violations that can amount to war crimes. The RSF and the Sudanese armed forces must cease these intolerable attacks against civilian objects that are indispensable to the civilian population, including markets, health facilities, schools, and shelters. But I need to tell you what one of the engineers told me. He said, "They didn't stop the attacks, and we will not stop our efforts to keep lights, the electricity in Sudan." And he explained to me at great detail what this actually meant and was heroic efforts to keep whatever is possible in terms of electricity clean. It was clear, it was undeterred, it was defiant, and even when the latest attack directly hit the office where his team works, he kept on. I've met with those who have been hardest hit by brutal violence and injustice in this war. A chronicle of cruelty is unfolding before our very eyes, and we must not look away. This needs to shock our collective conscience. All those who have any influence, including regional actors and notably those who supply the armies and benefit economically from this war, need to act urgently to put an end to it. At the Al-Assad site in a Daba locality that is now sheltering some 20,000 displaced people, in particular from Al-Fashir, I met a 4-year-old who lost his hearing due to bombardment and now clearly very traumatized that they were with other kids. A 3-year-old who would time. I met Hawa, who was working towards her master's degree in psychology when she had to flee Al-Fashir after losing her 19-year-old son due to shelling. Consumed, she recounted that she was robbed, beaten, and her husband was assaulted, detained, and tortured by RSN, who demanded a ransom of 10 million Sudanese pounds, which amounts to some 2,860 US dollars. So many provided testimony of detained, disappeared, and missing family members and friends. And you know what this means, don't you? You're not aware of what happened to your loved one. One woman saw her husband and only son killed. I met her still bedridden from grief and still carrying the bullet that she took in her shoulder while trying in vain to shield her son. Commanders of this conflict And those who are earning, funding, and profiting from this war need to hear what a 20-year-old in Aisha, now in Arafat, told me in her words. On 20 October, we were fleeing from Al-Fashar on a donkey cart. It was the only transport we could afford. On the road to Garni village, there were lots of dead bodies. We saw armed men on camels who said, "Bring down the women." My brother tried to stop. They shot him in his legs. My mother started crying and said, "Leave my children, take me instead." They hit her, took me, and told me to keep quiet or they would kill my mother. Then, what happened? Happened. My period does not come since then. Women and girls' bodies have been weaponized. My office in Sudan has documented patterns of extensive conflict-related sexual violence in Al-Fashar on exit routes during the final offensive in October, as well as during the capture of neighboring Samsam IDP camp in April this last year. Sexual violence is being used as a weapon of war, which is a war crime, and we have more and more indications that this is widespread and systematic. I also had accounts of widespread summary executions by RSNs during the offensive on Al-Fashar for revenge, for suspected affiliation with the SAF or its allied joint forces, and prior to the offensive, one man told me of people killed for trying to bring milk, powder, and flour into Al-Fashar, while the RSF had the city under 18 months siege, imposing a mandate famine. We must not let the perpetrators of these horrific violations and abuses get away with this, regardless of their affiliation. My office in Sudan is working daily to document and report on these violations and abuses to pave the way for accountability. The terrifying experiences of these survivors must provoke action to end this conflict, to prevent this from happening to another Aisha, another Hawa, and to make sure they can access what they need most: medical care, psychosocial care, justice, and support to pursue education and livelihoods. Throughout the course of this conflict, all parties to it have perpetrated gross violations and abuses of international human rights law and serious violations of international humanitarian norms, notably when the fighting intensifies to control new areas. I am very worried that the atrocity crimes committed during and after the takeover of Al-Fashar are at grave risk of being repeated in the Kordofan region, where the conflict has been rapidly escalating since last October. Kordofan states are extremely volatile, with relentless military engagements, heavy shelling, drone bombardments, and airstrikes by parties to the conflict, causing widespread destruction and collapse of essential services. All, again, with a heavy toll on civilians. There are advances towards SAF-controlled Khartoum by the RSF and SPLM, and we are seeing continued massive displacement of civilians from the siege city. All this in the context of extreme food insecurity, with famine conditions confirmed in Khartoum and risk of famine in other areas, including in Dili. Warning signs of what was to happen were already clear before Al-Fashar was captured. So I bring you back to Al-Fashar because our warning signs were very clear. We issued these warnings multiple times, including in September last year. But yet, these warnings were not heeded and heinous atrocities were committed. I issue here today the same stark warning for Khartoum. Proliferation of advanced military equipment, in particular unmanned aerial vehicles or drones across Sudan, has enhanced the military capabilities of both the RSF and SAM to inflict mass damage, prolonging hostilities and impeding the crisis for civilians. It is despicable that large sums of money are being spent on procuring increasingly advanced weaponry, funds that should be used to alleviate the suffering of the population. No one in his right mind could think that continued fighting is the answer. And I kept asking myself when I was there, what is it that those who wage this war want to achieve. Why would anyone in their right mind jeopardize the lives or the soul of many? I'm also deeply alarmed by the increasing militarization of society by all parties to the conflict, including through the arming of civilians and recruitment and use of terror. In my meetings with more than 50 local and international organizations in Dongola and Port Sudan, I heard appeals directed to those waging this war and the international community to end this madness and to allow NGOs, journalists, lawyers, humanitarian activists to do their essential work without undue restrictions and reprisals. Across the country, thousands of civilians, including civil society activists, lawyers, and journalists, have been detained on accusations of collaboration with the opposing party to the conflict. I was also very concerned to hear that journalists are being subjected to restrictions that severely limit their ability to do their jobs, are targeted by smear campaigns, disappearances, and violence by both sides. The absence of free and independent media only perpetuates the conflict, as helps foster hate speech, which continues to have a pernicious impact, dehumanizing people and fueling brutal violence. The work of journalists and broader civil society must be facilitated and protected. It is time to get rid of the harmful old habits, bureaucratic hurdles, also when it comes to the provision of humanitarian assistance. Implementing practical confidence-building measures that foster trust can pave the way towards ending this horrific war, forging comprehensive peace, and returning reclusive civilian governance. As an immediate first step, I call on all parties to the conflict to ensure protection of civilians and civilian infrastructure, to guarantee safe passage for civilians to these areas of conflict, including Kaduli and Mili, as well as to ensure unimpeded access for the delivery of humanitarian aid. Measures such as humane treatment of detainees, accounting for and establishing the fate of missing persons, and releasing civilians detained for alleged collaboration with the opposing party are also priority areas. 3 years ago, when I last visited Sudan, I made a plea that I find myself repeating today. I urge all those involved to set aside entrenched positions, power games, and personal interests, and to focus on the common interest of Sudanese. At the time, I had also urged that human rights be at the core of the transition. Sadly, they were not. And the brutal war upended the very real possibilities for the country to transition to democratic governance following this awful 30-year-old dictatorship. Again, I leave with the plea that human rights is central to building confidence and bringing this war to an end, resuming the difficult task of building a sustainable peace. It is certainly very difficult, but it is not impossible. And I feel very much encouraged by the people, by the Sudanese people who had a chance to meet their resilience and their power of not giving up. My office and I personally are obviously very committed to doing whatever we can to assist. Thank you.